Hi, everybody. My name is David Nour. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Sales Community Tech Sales Insight podcast series. And my other host or co-host is Randy Seidl. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Nour. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Good to be with you. For those that may not know as much about the sales community, can you give us a 1-minute overview?
Absolutely. Thanks. We've got a lot of our members are on this. The idea from a high level is learn more so you can sell more, so you can make more money. We've got lots of great content there. So think old school library, different topics that you can go search on. Lots of great live webinars like this with Kevin Dougherty, who we had last week, Ricardo de Blasio coming up next week. We got your great 10X series, which is once a month. We do every other Tuesday, Design Your Life. This week we did high leverage activities. Previously, we've done your professional brand, your vibe. You can go and ask questions, get feedback, ask questions, answer other questions, network amongst the great group we have. So as far as I know, it's very unique to be niche-y for enterprise B2B tech sales, help everybody learn more and sell more.
Beautiful. And our podcast guest earlier today was Ken Dougherty. Why don't you introduce Ken and we'll ask him to share a couple minutes about his background.
Absolutely. And I also forgot to mention we have a 30-day free trial. So not to be totally cheesy, but it's definitely no brainer for you to go try it at salescommunity.com. For those that don't understand, for the Tech Sales Insights, we have a pre-recorded podcast that was released this morning. It's available on our site, on LinkedIn. You can go to Spotify under Tech Sales Insights. And it's a great pre-recorded podcast, about 35 minutes, obviously featuring Ken and Nour. And Ken, now this is our AMA, Ask Me Anything session. This is the second one that we've done. Prior 3 months, we did live Twitter chats, and based on the great response we had last week from Kevin Dougherty, we're going to do this going forward. So Ken's fantastic. Known him for a lot of years. Somehow I age and lose hair, and he just gets younger. He's had a fantastic sales career, small companies, big companies. If I were a rep, the best thing I could say is I would want to work for him. So thanks for making the time, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Super delighted to be here, and lucky to have some great teachers. David and Randy, it was a blast doing the podcast. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Vice President of Sales for the Enterprise Preferred business at Dell Technologies. It's about a $1.5 billion division within the company that's focused on underpenetrated accounts, white space, cross-line of business selling, and really in many ways, it's a startup within a large company. And I think the real excitement of that is some of the entrepreneurial capabilities to bring to a big company and some of the teachings I've had from Randy and Chris Riley and various folks in my career. So excited to be here.
So Ken, it's great to have you. One of the early stories you shared that I really appreciated was you were a bartender and a friend was in copier sales. Talk a little about what attracted you to sales and what were some early lessons you learned that really have helped you along the way?
I think one of the things that's really cool about this process too, just on a side note, is going through all the invites and just going back through LinkedIn to see all the various folks that have touched me in my career or been a part of my career. And you look at this starting point, and I was bartending in Burlington, Massachusetts at a small restaurant, and a couple of guys used to come in on a regular basis. Their names Dave Balin and Steve Glenn and Dave Hydorn, and they'd be wearing these really cool Chess King suits. If you guys remember Chess King back in the early 2000s or the 90s, I should say. And they were driving Nissan Altimas, and I'm sitting behind the bar and saying, "What do you guys do?" So we sell copiers. I said, I could probably do that. You want to, could I try it out? And they said, "Sure, come on down for an interview." And I went, I got the job, on the spot, and they hired people. It was kind of almost like a small bullpen or boiler room type environment. You learn sales, you learn perseverance. You said, one of the things I learned the most was just perseverance. I would knock on literally 50 doors a day, if not more, door to door, giving my pitch. "Hi, my name's Ken Dougherty. I represent Northern Business Machines, et cetera, et cetera." And, most times they'd say, "Get the hell out of my office," and you'd have to go to the next office. And eventually you'd get a hit. And when you got a hit, you'd say, "Okay, what do I do next?" The whole idea was follow up from there. And there's so much more we learned that I'll kick it back to you. But that was the foundation. And I couldn't have asked for better training than selling copiers early on.
Seidl, both you and Ken have hired a lot of great reps. You have both developed a lot of great reps, particularly in the middle of this pandemic. Would you say that tenacity that Ken talked about is what's setting the really successful reps apart from their peers?
Absolutely. I mean, Ken's great one to lead by examples, as I'm sure he'll say later. Know me, like me, trust me. But relationship during the pandemic is absolutely key, and there's nobody better than him that does that.
And how has, and Ken, this would be really helpful. So what I love is you came up through the scrappiness of door-to-door selling and really learned those hunting skills, those prospecting skills. How have those evolved because of this pandemic? Because none of us are going out. We're not knocking on doors traditionally. What are you guys doing differently? And talk a little about also the enterprise preferred role at Dell.
Yeah, so like I said, enterprise preferred is a subset of customers that really haven't bought as much from Dell Technologies, maybe some of the other larger enterprise accounts. Working previously, really in many ways, this was Chris Riley's baby and actually was financed by Michael Dell to look at this subset of customers that just, the business might have been in decline. And the idea was to give the same user experience, end user experience with these smaller customers as you would get at Citigroup or Wells Fargo, whatever it might be. So we took, really what was a declining business and turned it into a growth engine, but it was very much going back to those early days, showing up, educating customers, spending time really, getting to know these customers and reestablishing trust. And Randy used the term, know me, like me, trust me, buy from me. The reason I use that is because I think trust is critical when customers want to buy from you or partner with you. It's also critical if, for your team, people that work for you. You asked that question of, great sales teams. Your people have to trust you and believe that you're going to do really what you ask them to do.
For our audience, you can use the comments section to, would love to hear from you. Randy and Ken have, great number of years of sales and sales management and sales leadership. So Randy, I think we've got a question from Mario.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start. The first question's from Frederick Van Haren. So is actually a longtime customer of both of ours, and it's a compliment. Ken, without a doubt, one of the best leaders that I know. Ken shares the template for being one of the best sales leaders and leading by example. So, talking about relationships, Frederick's been great to both of us for a long time. So yeah, so now getting back to, so thanks for that, Frederick. So getting back, Mario, what was the turning point in your sales career, Ken?
Well, like I said, I think the turning point was I ended up selling a copier to a gentleman by the name of, and he might be on this, Matt Westover, who, as I was selling the copier, I had no idea that he was watching my communication skills, ability to overcome objections, product knowledge, follow-up skills, all these things. Actually, he was driving me crazy as I was going through the sales campaign saying, I just want to get the sale. And I didn't know really the whole time he was interviewing me without me even knowing it. So at the end of the journey, I got the sale, which was great. And he pulled me in his office and he said, hey, Ken, I've been watching you. And you didn't know this, but I've been interviewing you the whole time. And do you want a job or do you want a career? So that was a turning point, Mario, because at that point, I obviously wanted a career. It was an opportunity to work for Matt and get into the business. And 25 years later, I've, just had mentor after mentor in this industry that has really made the difference, Mario. And one last thing I'd add on that, you referenced turning points. It's not so much a turning point. It's more of a goal of saying, how do you make sure that you're on the right path long-term? And, I think Chris Riley's the one that said to me many times, you need a godparent in this business, a godfather in this case, someone that's going to care about you and help shepherd you throughout your career. And I've been really lucky to have folks like Randy and Steve Gordon and Matt and Chris, of course, throughout that journey. I've been really, really fortunate.
Randy, I want to build on that comment by Ken that you need godfathers, you need mentors. How critical is the role of having a mentor in a sales organization, and what's the biggest impact you've seen mentors make in the folks they mentor?
Yeah, I think we've all had them, and they're just other sounding boards. Frequently, they are outside of the organization, so you can kind of be a little bit more open, but definitely helps you ask those questions, helps you kind of follow other people that have been there before in terms of what to do and how to do it. And I think there's background. So I'm going to go grab my earbuds, and I will be back. I'll let you take it.
No issues. So we will. You and I, Ken, you and I will continue.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the traits. I'm really curious about those mentors. Were there some traits that they really helped elevate your skills, knowledge, your abilities?
Yeah, just, I've said this before about Randy and Chris and various others, action oriented. I think that's one of the biggest compliments I can give a leader. If you look at the folks that have been successful in their careers, they're not doing it for money at this point. Not saying they're not well paid, but they're doing it because of the impact they're having on people. And that action orientation, they've never asked me or asked really the folks that have worked for them to do anything they wouldn't do themselves. So that's part of it. Certainly, making sure that you had the right intentions, and the goal was to build a team and bring everybody up together. And that was really some of the best leadership traits these folks shared with me and put me on this journey of being able to hopefully build those types of sales organizations myself.
That's awesome. So let's go back to Frederick. Has got a great question. What would you say the salesperson who wants to grow into a leadership role?
Well, first of all, Frederick, thanks so much for the compliment you provided earlier. You and I had a lot of great journeys together, and I know Chris played an active role in that, and Matt Lanigan, who's out there, I think somewhere. And in the case of Frederick, one of the things I think that touched you, Frederick, was when you had a bad batch of drives. I believe at one point when there was a subsystem you had bought from Hewlett Packard, and Chris went in quickly and said, "Hey, we'll take care of it." Didn't ask questions, fixed it. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars that got addressed, and you said, "Okay, that's the first thing." Well, that's integrity. So you have to have honesty, integrity. You need technical aptitude, which, Frederick, you have forgotten more about technology than most of these folks on the phone know. And you have to, really be willing to engage. And, Chris has said this many times too, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And, sales is all about being uncomfortable. I love this podcast. It's a blast, or this webcast, but there's always going to be a little bit of, you feel that energy in your belly. That's being comfortable, being uncomfortable, Frederick. You have to be able to push through that discomfort. Beautiful.
Randy, you're back with us.
Yes. All right. Hopefully that's better. Sorry about that. From Tyler Dougherty, what's your best piece of advice handling high stress situations that arise during a sales career?
Well, you would know better than anybody, Tyler, as my son, coming home. Hopefully I handle it pretty well, but I would say being able to compartmentalize at times, easy for me to say, understand that, there's always going to be, fortunately for all of us, a tomorrow. And, sales, someone said to me early on, there's more roller coasters in a day in sales than oftentimes there are in various, jobs you might have for 20 years. So get used to the roller coaster, enjoy the ride, and actually take that stress that, and help it fuel you to make sure that you're driving towards success. And don't be afraid to fail. Sales, you fail plenty, but overall, you get there's a lot of wins that go along the way too.
Ken, I want to build on something you and I talked about in the podcast, which were attributes of the sales superstars. And I wrote in my notes, you mentioned, and you also referenced Frederick in this, sales reps have a great technical aptitude. They have the right attitude, and then they make that effort. Can you build on that? Can you comment on those three real quick?
Well, I look at some of the folks, I was thinking about this podcast, and even last week that, Kevin Haverty was on here, and I'm thinking that those are pretty big shoes to fill, right? One of the hottest, biggest companies in the globe. And, he's joining this call last week. And one of the things that he has, or that Randy has, or that, any of the leaders I've worked with in my life, they all work hard. I think, Chris and I have talked about how you want to make people better. That's a huge compliment if you can do that for folks. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for hard work. And that's the attribute above and beyond all. When it's late in the day, you can choose not to make a phone call or persevere through something, or you can choose to do it. And I think the folks that succeed the most, and this is commonsensical, I'm sure everybody's like, no kidding, but it's hard work. And I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. It's that simple.
Randy, any substitute for that work ethic that Ken brings up and that grit to just kind of persevere?
There's not. Dick Egan, rest his soul, used to say, harder you work, the luckier you get. So a violent agreement.
Absolutely. All right, let's take another question from our audience.
Sure. A lot of great names here. JT Urenson. Yep. Ken, obviously great to see you. How are you finding success building that trust when prospecting in today's COVID environment? I know there's not a silver bullet, but maybe habits developed. So maybe talk about specifically for places where you don't have the prior relationship. So building that trust and get the know me, like me, trust me in the COVID environment for net new accounts and names.
Yeah, I mean, JT, great to hear from you. I love seeing some of these names out there. And I think that just because you don't know someone, at one point, and I'm surprised I haven't referenced him yet, but early on in my sales career, I was fortunate to be mentored by a gentleman by the name of Walter Brown. And Walter Brown wrote a book called Chasing Quota. And in many ways, he was instrumental in building the EMC sales force. And Randy developed a very close relationship with him, as did Chris and various folks in those days. And he in many ways broke it down to simplified thought processes about some of those things that you're trying to do. And in that case, he would always say, never hire a stranger. And by that, he means never hire someone you don't know or someone you trust or know doesn't know. And what I'm saying there is that with the prospecting process, JT, you've got a great network. That's why I'm glad you're on this call. It's not all about you having to know the person. It could be who do you know that has a connection to that person. And no one does that better than Randy. The minute you mention the name, I'm not sure if I know that person, but hey, I think someone else I know does. And then boom, you're engaged. Then you're in front of a warm audience versus a cold audience. Because if someone you know or trust knows that person, again, somewhat commonsensical, but that person says, oh yeah, that person said you're a pretty good guy or girl or man or woman. Great. Okay, let's have a conversation about what you do. And then they'll spend time with you.
Which this reiterates something that, Randy, you and I have heard from multiple executives in this series of how critical your reputation is, right? And that consistent brand over the years, right? So, Ken, I don't think I've spoken with anybody who have brought up Randy Seidl and they've said, that son of a gun, he owes me money, or that.
Yeah.
So it's really critical that you double down on the relationships that are critical to your success, and you build a great, consistent reputation. And in our stream, we've got multiple compliments of you both. Randy, you want to take the next one?
Sure. Christian Butler. Christian, great to hear from you. Ken, you've been an incredible mentor to me as a seller and a sales leader. Where do you think the technology business is going the next couple of years? What market trends are most critical?
Hey, Christian, great to hear from you. It was great talking to you a couple weeks back, and congrats on the new gig. I think it's a situation where the world is getting more complex, and whoever's going to be able to provide reduction of operational complexity, they're going to win. So you look at Kevin Haverty last week with ServiceNow. What does that do for customers? It helps provide reduction of operational complexity. You look at the robotics process and automation business. What are they doing? They're reducing complexity because they're using maybe bots to help deliver, on initiatives or projects or whatever it might be versus humans. There's only so much we can do within the 24 hours a day we have, Christian. And I think what's happening is that evolution of technology has everything to do with, reduction of operational complexity, and not to, talk about Dell Technologies specifically, but I will say in this case, that's part of our, value add to our customers. Or you talk about how do you do more with less, you reduce complexity, and you provide a better experience for the customer.
Ken, I want to switch gears back to our podcast interview second. One of the things that, again, I wrote in my notes you brought up was positivity quotient.
Pichu. Yeah, so, again, I've been lucky in each step of the way, whether it be in Dataco to Storage Tech to HP to, Dell, to have great leaders that tended to be positive by nature. So I work now for a gentleman by the name of John Byrne, who's the president of the Americas, and he talks about EQ and PQ, right? EQ is how you get along with folks. PQ is positivity. And, I said this to someone the other day. I interviewed a young leader that was potentially going to be a sales DM. And I said, don't ever confuse being nice with being weak. Don't ever confuse being positive with it being a bad thing. People know you're going to hold people accountable. They understand that there's going to be a need for it to be a two-way street, and you're going to keep reminding folks of that. But the key there is to stay positive. I think people are attracted to positive energy in every area of life. And it's not a coincidence when you walk into a sales call. I would go into a meeting with, I'll use someone as an example out there, Jim Murphy, with a customer. Customer knew, or Derek Twom, they knew we got along. They knew we knew and liked each other. And the customer fed off that positive energy. A lot of times it turned to sales.
So I'm talking about positive energy, and I appreciate Mark Callahan jumping in. In case you're wondering why Ken Dougherty has such a good-looking tan. The rest of the U.S. is frozen. The man is so dedicated to this cause that is joining us from Aruba, I think you said, right? Is that true?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah,
Very
you could check. Make sure the driver got plowed, Cal. That would be terrific if you could stop by and check things out over there.
That's hysterical.
Oh,
hey,
sure.
so from Dan Petrosinelli, great to see you, Ken. One of the best teachers I've had in my career. Love your passion. It's contagious. If you can talk a little bit more how you keep the passion going.
Oh, that's a good
We're
question,
talking
Dan.
professionally.
I think Ken was on this podcast for the record or whatever this is. So,
well, your best sales call ever was getting a yes from her. That's for sure.
All right. Well, to your point, to your question, how do you keep the passion going? Dan, I think sometimes it's being interested in learning at all times and saying, what's new, right? You took on the Cigna account and talk about it wasn't enterprise preferred, but I remember Chris and I talking about who'd be a great fit for that account. You come in, you turn around, you walk in, the customer, you build relationships because of that positive energy. I think staying passionate sometimes is staying in learning mode and wanting to continue to increase your craft and just learn. And I think that keeps you passionate along the way.
And Randy, I've always believed it also fuels us, right? So my litmus test for our audience is the alarm clock, right? If you get up, either before that thing goes off or, when it goes off versus you hit the snooze button 10, 12, 15 times, it might be time to go do something else. But if you're excited about what you're doing, you get out of bed, you tackle it. There's no looking back. You're passionate about what you're doing and it fuels you. So on that note, we have a question from William Accord. Randy, do you see that or you want me to jump in?
No, I see there's just so many questions here. Ken, what portion of the sales strategy, if any, is solely dedicated to fostering the intimate relationships required to win customers? Anyone being compensated to build intimate strategic relationships without selling?
So if I'm reading the question properly, I guess it's, if you're not necessarily on the sales side and you might be on the sales support side, how do you maintain that same ability to build relationships? Well, I think it would go back to, what Frederick referenced earlier and some of the things that, it was always a two-way street. And the pre-sales team that supported our business was invaluable. They had the same level of energy towards the success of our business as any salesperson could have. And I think if you bring everybody together and that ecosystem becomes a community and everybody feels like they're contributing to a win, it's a much different feeling. And, you have to have a little bit of fun along the way too. You talk about that, how do you continue that motivation piece? I've surrounded myself throughout my whole career with some pretty fun people. We reference on the podcast a story with Blake Galvin, and I know Blake's out there is one of the, you just laugh and you need to. Tyler asked me earlier, how do you manage the stress? You have to balance some laughs. You have to balance some fun along the way. In this specific case, we're not doctors. We're out there helping sell technology, hopefully, that will help with various needs in the world, maybe in many cases, hospital education. But we're not doctors. So, the seriousness of it, need to have a little fun along the way, too.
Ken, one of my favorite questions is asking leaders the advice you would give to a younger version of yourself. And you said, be more patient at times. How has that manifested over the years, and how have you become more patient in your career?
Well, I think, again, back to Walter Brown, he said you need 7 really key cards to be successful. And I usually am able to rattle them off. You need a healthy marketplace. You need competitive technology. You need supportive management, but you also need time. And, unfortunately, the world we live in now, especially in sales, time it can be our enemy. Everything is quarterly driven. We live in 90-day lives. I've had 100 quarters in my career now. So there's always going to be that balancing act of needing it yesterday, but you need to make sure that you have some patience, especially when you're young. And probably what I'm referring to in that case is career development. Everybody wants that next job, but you can also jump too quick, and you need to be smart about that. And you have to have patience. Sometimes, David, and this is a quick funny story, you don't always have to have patience. And I'll never forget, I had the senior vice president of global procurement at Travelers Insurance, is a good friend of mine to this day, Dave McNeish. I was calling on him. It was the end of the quarter. I couldn't afford patience. We said we were going to get a deal. We both agreed the deal was going to happen. I ended up calling him 7 times in one day. 7th time he picks up. I won't use the French word he used, but he said, Ken, what the do you want? I said, Dave, we agreed we were going to get a deal done today. And he did get it done. So it was that balance between patience personally and a little bit of sense of urgency at all times professionally. So it's a little bit of a two-edged coin or double-sided coin.
Got it. For our audience, make sure you jump in with questions for Randy or Ken. Randy, I think we got another one.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back on William McCord's question. So even if you're not in sales, in terms of relationships, something I'd always encourage people to do, even if you're in operations, engineering, finance, would be an executive sponsor. So not sure what area you're in, William, but you'd add value to end user customers, to a partner. You may not be the CIO at Cigna, but maybe a lower level person that still has a critical relationship for whatever company you're at. So being an executive sponsor or account sponsor in any fashion is a good thing to do for sure. John Carcelli, John, how you doing? So he asked something about a recent favorite book.
So no, Randy, you go first. I actually have the book with me, and it's you go first.
Okay.
I actually can't think of the name. It's with me down here.
Okay, it's Ash Wednesday, so you could say the Bible.
Yes, you could say
that. Anyway, so one I had is $1 Trillion Coach. It is on Bill Campbell, who's a longtime member, mentor, has unfortunately since passed away, but just a great, quick, easy read. And as a side note, I posted it last night in sales community when Cam Heiser was asking about books. And there's a part in there where Phil Schiller talks about being at Mary Ann's, which is a dive bar by BC, and John Clavin, Peter Bell, Jerry Doyle, and I were all there. And if you read it, hopefully you get a laugh from it. And I'll put in a shameless plug. I've got a book I'm co-authoring with Tony Geary called Your Go-To Sales Advisor. The 2 books that Ken mentioned from Walter Braun are in there. I've got a bunch of best practices. We've got Ken and 90 others from our advisory board have written best practices. Nour also has contributed. So look for that sometime in the next couple months.
Should be great.
Hey, John, I read that book every day. So if you want to use that as an example, the other one is by Jim Gray, and just the name wouldn't come to me. But the point is that Chasing Quote I read every day.
Got it. We've got another one, Randy.
All right, Murph, finally on the board. Haven't heard from Blake yet, but I
don't think he can get into the system. That's his challenge right now, Randy, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Well, at least he can sell. Anyway, so Murph, it's good stuff. Ken, can you talk about the art of inspection without micromanagement?
Yeah, I mean, Murph, obviously we had a chance, and we talk all the time, right? We've worked together. We've been friends for years. I think the inspection process can happen naturally, organically, and inorganically, meaning, when someone's a senior rep, I think, for lack of a better way of saying, getting in their shorts every day is probably not the best way to inspect. It's about where you can add value. You're going to see pretty quickly if that person's forecast is accurate. I've said many times that the best way and the number one way I measure a sales professional is forecast accuracy, because it tells the entire story of how well they know their customer and how well they know the buying cycle and how good their relationships are. But back to your exact point, Murph, I think it's all about understanding that if you're adding value and you're involved, the need for an inspection is different. Now, that only scales so far. So there is an absolute need to inspect, and especially newer reps that maybe don't have that experience. So you've asked kind of 2 questions. One is, what do you do with senior people, and what do you do with younger folks? If they're senior and they're hitting the numbers on a regular basis, say, hey, how can I help? And other than that, I'm going to steer you away a little bit, let you do your job. Of course, they need to deliver. On the younger folks, the thing, again, back to Walter and back to the book. So John, it's kind of nice you asked that question. From Walter, he talked about the 3 questions you ask, and there's a lot of methodologies to inspect. And I would just have it on my whiteboard on a regular basis. I remember in Hartford, Connecticut, it would say, why do it? Why now? Why with us? You answer those 3 questions, that deal is probably committable, and we're going to go ahead and say that it's a real deal. So that's a little bit of the 2 areas, Murph. I think you definitely can't treat every rep the exact same way, because there are different needs out there.
Ken, how do you raise the bar on a rep's ability to forecast more accurately?
How do you say that again, David?
How do you raise the bar? How do you help reps forecast more accurately?
Well, again, I think you teach them, that old, teach a man to fish, they eat for life. You give them a fish, they eat for a day. I think it's all about getting in front of those customers with those salespeople, being comfortable on being uncomfortable, asking tough questions. Chris and I have talked about that a million times and said, a lot of times salespeople don't want to ask tough questions. That's what you're paid to do. And back to the whole sales world we're in, I've said this during the podcast, I think we're pretty lucky to be in this business, to make the incomes we make in this business. And so sometimes you just have to do things that are uncomfortable, including asking those tough questions. Now, once you've taught someone to do it, that's a fatal flaw, David, as you know. If someone at the end of a sales cycle just continually can't close, well, maybe they're in the wrong job. Doesn't mean they're not great at what they do, and you could use them in a different way. Sometimes as a sales leader, you may say, you know what? I've kind of looked at my team, that person can close and this person struggles with it. So I'm going to spend my time there helping them close and making sure you hit your numbers.
Randy, we got another question.
Yeah. So Luke Glidden asked you to talk a little bit more about the 16th second.
So, Luke, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have that question off the top of my head. Comes around.
It's I would imagine it probably has to do with the kind of pause. You ask a question, you wait, and you basically you got to wait and keep your mouth shut. And 16 seconds probably seem like 16 minutes.
Well, first of all, great answer, Randy. Whether it was accurate or not off the spot, that was pretty good. Luke is a friend of my son Tyler's, and he's a young up and comer in the world. And so, Luke, I think that Randy's point there is extremely valid. It all ties back to the same concepts. It's very uncomfortable being quiet sometimes and just pausing and letting a customer think before you keep going. And I remember Steve Gordon and I used to work with some folks at Storage Tech in the early days, and there was a rep there. I won't mention the name, but he would talk through the sale, and the customer would say, "You have the order," and then he'd keep talking. And at some point, the customer's like, "All right, you're not even listening. I don't want to buy anything from you anymore." So there is a period where you got the order, you just pause, silent for a little bit, and you're comfortable with that silence.
And you get out. Frank Keeney used to always say at EMC, never miss the opportunity to say nothing. So especially you get the order, and you get the hell out. Kevin Purcell has another one, some nice comments. And then he says, why go back to a big company again? You better be able to answer this one.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's a pendulum, right? I mean, I loved the entrepreneurial side of a startup. You learn a lot of things. You end up being, sales leader, chief bottle washer, and you're doing all these different things. And you're learning marketing, you're learning operations, you're learning product management. But guess what? The cool part about all that, when you bring it back to a company, a large company, Kevin, you know this, right? But you go back to a large company and you have all those things. If you embrace them and really act like everyone has the same level of importance, everybody then starts moving together. So, the back and forth of going to a large company or a small company, they both have plus and minuses. I think it's just the period of time you're in. And in my world currently, it is entrepreneurial, even though it's a big company. So that's a little bit of getting the best of both worlds.
We have a couple questions on relationships. I'd love to jump in with this one. So James wants to know, we hear relationship building a lot. Do you find customers being less loyal as tech becomes a commodity? Buyers have a much greater understanding of competitive market. Let me jump in, and then Ken, I'd love to hear yours and then Randy's. I would submit the more commoditized your market becomes, the more stronger differentiator, your unique value add becomes. So if you're just selling a technology that I can get a whole lot of other places, you're not really adding a whole lot of value. I can get that from a website. Conversely, if you either help me bring that into a solution, or if you help me integrate that and create the outcome that I'm after, not just the output, then you set yourself apart. Ken?
Are you laughing at Blake's comment that he sent to us, Randy? But back to the question.
I'll get back to that. Go ahead.
All right, that's priceless. So, David, I think, and my team's heard me say this a million times, I break things down into three things all the time. Three legs of a stool, I call it. There's a business piece, there's a technology piece, and there's a financial piece. So you could use relationship on the business side. So let's just use relationship, technology, and financial. James, back to the question. It's about really, what the customers need is at that time. Sometimes the technology will drive the decision. That's why emerging tech companies do so well, because you create a widget that maybe someone else didn't have, even if maybe the relationship didn't exist, and people start buying this technology because it helps companies, drive revenue faster, reduce costs in their business, whatever it is. And, certainly we talked about that with things like ITSM or RPA and in those sectors and markets. But I think, depend upon the customer, they're always going to have a different need. So if they're looking at something and say, hey, it's a long journey, well, maybe the company and the stability and the long-term trajectory and roadmap of that company is going to be critical, one leg of the stool. Or if it's technology and they need faster database performance because their environment is slow and they don't care about anything but faster database performance, there might be a great new technology that will solve for that need. And sometimes it's financial wherewithal, and meaning, how creative can the financial structure become to allow that customer to preserve cash, OPEX, CAPEX, whatever it might be. So, in this world, I think the relationship is critical. We have talked a lot about them, but I don't think that you can just use relationships anymore. I think that's the evolution of salespeople. The old world was even more relationship driven. I think the relationship helps now, but you have to know your brief, you have to know your technology, and you have to be able to differentiate the value add and what it's going to do to help the customer, because that's what it's all about.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think a good analogy would be a bunch of us, especially Boston area friends that are in financial services market, and that's been tremendously commoditized. So people that had great jobs 20 years ago, those same jobs don't exist. But the ones that were able to ride it out the longest were those that had relationships. And people think, oh, it's just relationships. But again, come back to Ken, know me, like me, trust me. And you're delivering value. You know what's going on. You're sharp. You're crisp. You're responsive. So I think a lot of times people that don't have great relationship think it's this buddy type thing, but it's really made up of continually delivering and being responsive and helping out customers. And then kind of tied in there a little bit. So Megan Sullivan asked a great question here about working internally, and I'll take it, Ken, maybe while you think about your answer, but kind of internally with product management, product development, and strategic influence and healthy conflict of priorities. So going back, I'd say early EMC days, back when it was small, no matter where you were, you knew who was running each of those groups. And I would argue most of the time at companies, it's less about sales having a relationship with those groups. It's important, but making sure that even who they are. I won't name companies, but a lot of times you don't even know who they are. So figuring out who they are, and those people should be reaching out to sales to say, hey, I want to listen to customers. I want to get the customer perspective, because I think too many times the internal product management folks are so internally focused, thinking they know what the customer wants, as opposed to really going out there and getting that feedback. So for lack of better words, I guess a short answer would be extending the olive branch, kind of getting everybody on the same team to make sure you hear the same thing, as opposed to sales telling or trying to translate to product development and product management. And people a lot of times in those roles kind of are pretty hard-nosed when they're talking to sales, but then all of a sudden they go talk to the customer and they melt like butter because they know that the customer's right.
So Megan, one of the biggest misperceptions is that relationships is purely external, right? As you said, customers, channel partners, people outside the company, and there's enormous value in investing in those, as Randy commented on it, on those internal relationships. So prioritizing them, consistently investing in them, make sure you deliver on your commitments. Ken, to build on that?
Yeah, I would just say, Megan and I have known each other a long time. One of the pictures I'm most proud of in my business career is when we started this enterprise preferred business. And as I referenced, it's about $1.5 billion business now, growing because of what we're doing. And when you look at the picture, it isn't a sales team in the picture. It's not my sales team. It's the entire ecosystem in a boardroom, working on how we were going to get this thing off the ground. And everybody felt like they were, founding members to that business. So product management, channel, inside sales, of course, which has been a huge component, pre-sales, operations, finance. So exactly what you said, Megan, everybody felt like they were working together versus in vacuums or silos.
Randy, we've got another one. John Conti, and talking about talent.
Yes. Now you keep going back up on me. So there you go. All right. Thanks, John. Great seeing you, Ken. The challenge to attract and retain top talent getting harder. How are you doing that in your role, and especially probably during COVID?
So John and I had the pleasure of working together at CA. He's had a terrific career now as a frontline leader for a third of the country for a software company. And I think John, from that perspective, Chris and I have talked about this. Randy and I have talked about this. Steve Gordon and I have talked about this. You name it. People work for people all day long, and I know that you can always chase more money, and that's an option for sales professionals. Back to the patience thing, David. Young sales professionals often see, hey, that job will pay me 20 grand more. First of all, variable comp is always that's the piece that needs to be understood. Is it even possible to get that number? And John, back to that point, we had someone almost leave recently on our team on the West Coast, and I said, do you like who you work for? And the person said, yeah, I love who I work for. I said, do you know the person you work for in the next job? No, I don't really know. Just this opportunity is terrific. I said, when it's challenging, people work for people. They don't work for companies. People follow people. And John, you know that as well as anybody, right? Your long history with Michael Benson and team. And so I would just say that that's the part of retaining. Recruiting, it's back to those three legs. Is the company something that you think is on the right path? Matt Lanigan often used to say, hey, there's three variables to making a decision when you stay with a company or not, or whatever you do. It's a personal piece, a professional piece, and a financial piece. And depend upon where you're in your life. I have 2 kids in college, 2 more, going to college in the not too distant future. Depends. The financial piece might be a component that's even more important than other stages in life. So recruiting and retaining, 2 different things, but both tied to different variables.
Randy, are you hearing more of your technology CRO friends investing in are they investing more in developing their sales professionals or less?
Yeah, I think, very much hands-on. I'm just trying to think. We've had several people. I think Kevin Haverty mentioned it, Peter McKay, Bill Swales on prior podcasts, but kind of the ability to do one-on-ones is just, kind of with, Zoom and COVID's tough, but the other hand, just being able to be kind of a lot more productive, even though you're not face-to-face, investing in some of those relationships, the high performer program, saying, okay, how can you touch and develop folks like that is critical. Ken, we got a layup here from Don Nogler. How about the importance of the relationships between SEs and sales?
Yeah, so Don is my brother-in-law, and he knows relationships as well as anybody. So that's a great question. And he's been on the pre-sale side for much of his very successful career. And I think the reason that his teams have had such success is because there's no difference between the salesperson and the SC in regards to the importance when you're in front of a customer, and really understanding that the customer sees that many times a pre-sales person may bring more value near to the forefront than even the salesperson in that meeting. So there's almost no argument that the most successful sales engagements I've ever seen, the SC and the salesperson were locked at the hip.
We have some funny ones, so I'm just going to add some levity. This may be inappropriate, nor may fire me for my own show, but Blake's talking about the importance of appearance being helpful in face-to-face selling, and he's asking if you have any preference on a teeth whitening product.
Yeah, call Dan Petrosinelli, find out what he uses, and then just replicate that. He's got the best teeth in the industry.
For our audience, these guys go back, Randy, 20 plus years together. And I'm learning it's a very tight-knit community, and there's some fabulous stories between them in terms of what they've seen, what they've done, where they've been.
Is that, yes.
I wasn't sure you were going with that, David, but that's true.
There you go. So Blake does have a serious question. If you had to boil it down to your top characteristic you look for in sales folks you hire, what would that be? So top characteristics and reps you hire.
Well, I think integrity is number one, right? Blake, you need to know that, as you've often alluded to, not just people you hire, life is a two-way street. And it needs to be, if you're going to do for someone, you're going to pay it forward. No one does that more than Randy. You should want to return that favor. And you should want to make sure that that person's going to do things for you because that person wants to do it, not because you told them to do it. So I would say integrity. I'm I'm partial to loyalty. I think I'm not looking for blind loyalty, but I want to know that I may not always make the person that's working with or for me happy every day, but I'm hopeful when I'm not in the room that they're finding the positive things that I've been able to bring to them and maybe to the team versus the negative. And that loyalty is probably what builds great sales organizations, because people are, committed to a common cause.
Yep. And Rick Diana has not a question, but a great comment. Top guns need to be acknowledged as problem solvers. Prospects today compared to a decade ago possess volumes of data which can trump, no pun intended, the relationship. Net, do the homework on the client. So great point, Rick. And Ken, longtime customer, great guy, Bill Brown. Hi, Ken and Randy. Hope all is well. What advice do you have for a rep who had successful? Actually, this is probably Bill Brown Jr. looking by the picture. So isn't it amazing? We have customers whose now kids are in sales, and Bill Brown Jr. is doing great. But anyway, reps who had success at the individual level and is considering a jump to sales management. When do you know the time is right?
Randy used to say something back in the early days when I was working for him. He used to say, if someone delivers a great proposal, plagiarize with pride, right? And it's not about, taking up his work, but ask, hey, can I just use that as an example? And in this case, the thought process would be to look at others and what they've done. So I'm not calling that plagiarization, but make sure that you understand what the journey is and understand there are going to be challenges getting from individual contributor into management, but follow that path, follow what others have done, watch some of the folks that you've worked with and for, Bill. I mean, you're obviously a very successful young seller and have been in multiple companies with us. You're on your journey there, but kind of follow the lead and follow that journey that some others have. You'll have your opportunity, get sponsorship. I think that's critical to be able to get to that next level. And the last thing I would say, Steve Sullivan said this to me when I first started management, don't do a lot of things completely different than what you did when you were an individual contributor. Stay in front of customers, make sure you continue to collaborate and you're engaged with your team, and do a lot of things you did really well when you're an individual contributor and just translate that to management.
Yep. And there's a follow-on that Bill asked about when's the right time to start thinking about making that jump into management. And I would say, whether you're, kind of SDR right out of college or been selling for 10 years, if that's something you're interested in, find out at your, company and, talk to, who you work for, other people to say, what are the attributes that you need to work on. So, even if you're a net new SDR, maybe, 2 years till you're considered for management, but, there's certain skill sets and things that you would need to know. And at probably one of the better kept secrets, I mentioned high performer programs. Pretty much every company has a high performer program. So the best way to get promoted is to be part of that group, and then you're on the radar for lots of these other positions. So you can feel free to go to your manager if you're an individual contributor or manager, VP, RVP, whatever, and say, hey, this guy Randy said this high performer program, do we have something like that? And guaranteed all tech companies do. If you don't, you should.
Just for our audience, if you haven't had a chance to check out salescommunity.com /events, salescommunity.com/events, there's a great listing of upcoming events, and the conversation with Ken Dougherty in our podcast this morning can also be found here. Some great comments and ideas and perspectives that you'll definitely benefit from. So, Ken, talk about trends that you believe will stay with us in technology sales in the after COVID world.
Well, I think that actually the productivity potential is through the roof, right? And the number of customers that I'm seeing on a weekly basis is not diminishing. It might actually be increasing in this COVID world because, customers are a little more comfortable committing to, let's use a virtual EBC. Maybe it's a 3-hour session where they don't have to get on a plane to fly to Texas, to fly back home, lose 3 days in the field. And you can get that same message across. You can also get terrific access to executive leadership, these various companies. And, Michael Dell has sat on multiple EBCs that we've presented on, or Pat Gelsinger from VMware, now Intel prior. That access to executives, I think, will be a huge benefit because you're going to get more and more of that. The willingness to get customers engaged on a Zoom and a learning session, can be augmented by the in-person, and it will be. We'll always need the in-person, but I think it's going to be a healthy balance, and I think the productivity increase is going to be exponential.
Do you think not having the traditional marketing, demo days and trade shows and those kinds of things are hurting kind of technology sales, or do you think it's just streamlined how to quickly get to the right person, convey the value proposition, get them engaged?
I think it's the same, similar to last answer. It's a little bit of both. I think there'll need to be that in person, but it's all about people's willingness to pay attention too. And if you're face to face in a Zoom session and you're in an intimate environment and you're talking about a subject, you can't really kind of digress or multitask or be on your phone. In those big sessions, sometimes there's a lot of people that are sitting in seats that aren't paying attention to the speaker. So the idea is there's a little bit of that balance. Now, what tends to happen at those big events? You go through the sessions, then the smaller sessions, I think you get even more value at times from, and then after, that's when the relationship building process continues to develop. So there might be a dinner and you talk about what you learned that day, or lunch or breakfast. That's the part that I think will be necessary and still critical in our world, David. But it's definitely going to be a balance between the two, because people are, I think, realizing that this can be productive. It just needs that augmentation.
Randy, we got a question from Pat O'Brien.
Yes. Pat says, what suggestions do you have for successful Zoom interviewing?
Randy, you go first.
I was going to say, all I'm going to do is tell all the stuff that Nour tells me. So you said, okay, make sure you have something that's raised so you have good eyeball. Make sure you have a decent camera. Make sure your mic is not scratchy like mine has been scratchy. So those are some of the table stakes in his world. So I completely horrify him probably most of the time. But make sure that you're prepared. I think it's the same thing, just like you would in a normal interview. You've got time to be kind of sharp and on. I wouldn't worry about kind of looking down to take notes, because I think a lot of times people respect that. If I'm not necessarily interviewing somebody, but if I'm just talking to somebody and I'm offering, valuable information, they don't take notes, and that just drives me up a wall. So whether it's sales calls or interviewing, even if you're not going to do anything with it, which I'd argue is impossible, that you will do something with it, make sure that you're taking notes. So those are some things off the top of my head. And I think probably dress code wise, just generally speaking, things are a lot more lax than it used to be. I can't remember when anybody had a shirt and tie on. So casual I think is good, makes people comfortable. Ken, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, Pat, back to that point, people hire people work for people, and back to the people hiring people, there's an art to being comfortable in front of the camera and starting to be yourself. If I sat down with you tomorrow, because I know obviously Pat, and we'd have a conversation, your personality might come out differently than it does on camera. And I think if you get comfortable and just allow that to happen, and make sure the person on the other side is seeing a person, that's how people connect. And eventually you have an opportunity to, make that important connection for business.
So I'm a little bit of old school in this, which is I have driven into my kids any kind of an interaction. There's an opportunity to think of it in terms of a theater act: before, during, after. What can you do to prepare? So Randy brought it up. Due diligence on the industry, due diligence on the company, due diligence on whoever you're speaking with might be old school, but it's critical, because you don't ever want to show up and be surprised that they were just in the news that you didn't know about it, or they were just going through a major event and you didn't do your homework to do that. During, you got to be in the moment. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they multitask. Nobody's going to know that I'm texting underneath this video. Guess what? Everybody knows, right? So be in the moment, be engaged, sharpen your listening for not just what's being said, but also what's not being said. So I really value people that either read between the lines or bring up an interesting perspective that I haven't thought of, and it makes that conversation much more engaging, much more impactful. Last but not least is afterwards. So after the interview, sending, I think, personal handwritten notes are still absolutely set you apart. An immediate email with some sort of a unique value add. making sure you proactively stay in touch afterwards. Those are all the things that are going to set you apart from others that just show up and do their thing, and they don't really demonstrate that they really want the job or are interested in the job. So on that note, Ken, what are you most, in the last couple of minutes, what are you most looking forward to this next year? What are you most aspiring to do in the post-pandemic world?
Well, you asked me that question from Aruba, so typically I would say, to get out of the crazy world and get a chance to get away. So, in a little while I'll be on a beach, so that's going to be good, David. But in general, I think it's getting back to just reconnecting with people and having those face-to-face interactions. As we've talked about, the productivity increase we have with Zoom is going to be terrific, but there's no substitute for reading body language, getting in a room, working through customer objections, coming up with a solution, and earning the sale. So I'm super excited to get back face-to-face. I think there's a lot of things too that are just super fun in the world that we're not doing right now that are going to be a lot of fun, going back to sporting events and just being able to live our lives. So, super excited about that. And I'm hopeful we're not that far off.
Randy Seidl, most looking forward to?
Yeah, I think just more face-to-face. I'm likewise down here in Florida, so it's a little bit more relaxed than the rest of the country. But I think just getting back, so, those relationships and face-to-face time is of huge value. And as we're wrapping up here, an ask would be, if you're not a member yet or haven't checked out Sales Community, please do. Again, we got a 30-day free trial. It's a no-brainer. You cancel it then if you don't like it. And obviously we do it because it works. And if you would, on LinkedIn, which is I think how most of you registered, if you'd kindly go back in there, have any comments or testimonials about the session, tag any other people you think should be part of it, people that, probably Ken forgot that he knew. And as much as we joke about, knowing people and each other, 20 plus years, whatever, also what's important to us is the brand new relationship. So, if you're a net new SDR, there's kind of no question I don't answer every day. So on Sales Community, feel free to ask any questions. If you want to help with networking, we're all here to help. So, we're at a stage of our life where we're still, have professional goals and things that we're after, but, we're very happy to pay it forward and give back. And certainly people are generous to us in our lives. So really appreciate Ken and Nour. So thank you very much. And Nour?
Yeah, I think Ken will attest to this as well. Randy Seidl always goes above and beyond in helping everybody he can, and has been a great friend over the years. So on behalf of Randy, on behalf of the Sales Community, thanks for joining us. Our guest next week for a similar live stream video is Ricardo de Blasio, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Commvault. Don't miss that session, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Ken.
Great. Thanks everybody. Have a good one.
See you guys.
Thanks, Randy. See you guys.